Thank you. As well, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to their elders, both past and present. So it's my pleasant task today to introduce you to the 2013 winner of the prize, Tim Johnson. Tim. And introduce also Simon Chan, my co-principal sponsor, and Simon is going to interview Tim. So I'll hand the microphone to Simon. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Marlene. Thanks very much for coming today. It's a lovely day today, and it's good to be here when we have such a fantastic artist, Tim Johnson, with us. So, just as an introduction, for those of you who may not know Tim that well, although obviously he's a very well-known artist, we'll just talk about his background a little bit. A lot of you may not be aware Tim actually comes from a family of architects. His father was Professor Peter Johnson. When I was doing the architecture degree at Sydney University in the early 70s, he was actually the dean of the faculty. And his older brother, Chris Johnson, was also an architect. He's also an architect. He was the government architect for the New South Wales government, and currently he's the head of the Urban Task Force. I suppose probably the first question to Chris is to Tim is, with a family of architects, has it ever, been on your mind that you might become an architect, or did you always want to be an artist?
Being an architect was out of the question. But actually my brother's daughter became an architect.
Oh, is that right?
So it did continue in the family. But I sometimes wondered if I wasn't an artist, sort of to fulfill a need of my father's, to have someone in the family who was a bit more creative than an architect. I'm not actually having a go at him because he was a very creative person. But he did have a few artist friends, including Lloyd Rees.
Yes.
Who he saw as a kind of father figure.
Yes.
And that was because Lloyd Rees worked at the architecture school.
That's right.
But when I was growing up, I had my own ideas about what being an artist meant, and I did see Lloyd Rees as being the opposite of what I thought a young artist had to do. That was not to go back to the traditional approach to art, but to find new approaches. But the thing is, my dad really encouraged me. I think being an architect, he was very sympathetic to somebody wanting to be creative and to try and paint. He did tell me that if it didn't work out, I had to have a job to fall back on. So he sent me to uni, and I did a bit of training to become a teacher. And I actually got a job as an art teacher, but I was already practicing as an artist, so it didn't really interact with what I was doing, and in fact it almost made me stop being an artist because I found the kids in the school were so creative.
So where were you teaching at the time?
Cogra.
Okay.
Cogra High.
Right. Yes.
But what that meant was that, because in the early 70s I became a conceptual artist, which you're probably going to...
That's right. That's right. So I think, your first, your first step as an artist is really conceptual art. So how did you decide to get involved in that, and sort of can you maybe explain a bit, about that time, in the 70s?
Okay. As a teenager, I was very interested in my own culture. So I used to read and try to write poetry and try to do folk music. And I was reacting, like a lot of people my age, against the system. That was the time for hippies and dropping out, and we just felt we could make the world into a better place if we had a bit more control. And so I was sort of moving away from the idea of being a success success or of having a job and an income and thinking you've got to get out and hitchhike around Australia and you've got to write poetry and you've got to write music and do paintings. And so all through the 60s when I was a teenager I was painting, but mainly from books. And I was looking at things like pop art, minimalism, abstract expressionism, and at the same time there were things like happenings and events and performances. So there was a movement where art was becoming much richer and had a lot more potential. And even though I was like just still at school and still young, I felt I could be part of that.
And then I think after that you spent some time at Papunya and was involved with the Papunya Tula artist. And also your wife at the time, Vivian, as well. So maybe you might like to tell us how you sort of decided to do that, because you spent a bit of time there and you sort of virtually become really good friends with a lot of the Aboriginal artists, including Clifford Possum and so on. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that period of your life.
Okay, a little bit of background first. When in the early 70s when I started doing conceptual work, that meant basically that you weren't a painter, you were reacting against painting. And we did feel that with abstraction, painting had come to a finish. Like, people were exhibiting blank canvases, monochromes, including me. And even cutting the canvas up, finding ways to make the painting into something new, but it wasn't successful. And at the same time, with artists using text and performance and installation, other medium like light, metal, rubber, plastic. There's a whole huge number of artists from the 60s and 70s who, if you look at their work, you can see they're obviously experimenting with traditional notions of what painting is and coming up with something completely new. So I was part of that as it was happening in Australia. But by about the mid-70s, it had kind of faded out and there hadn't been a revolution. Suddenly, like the art we were doing, which was going to change things, it had been accepted by the gallery system, but it hadn't sort of made any really strong statements. And even though that was the case, some of the artists from that time went on to become very important. Like, for example, Mike Parr, doing performance, started in the early 70s, but is still doing it, and one of the best artists. So I went back to painting, because that was the thing I loved, and the thing I'd been doing since I was a child, with the encouragement from my parents. And that was influenced by conceptual art, so it was like a process, like an experimentation, and that really wasn't working either, because he still felt painting was finished, and at the same time photography performance was getting stronger and stronger. And then, partly because of my dad, I saw some Aboriginal paintings from Papunya in Central Australia. My dad used to collect Aboriginal art, and he brought home a couple of these Aboriginal dot paintings, which they started in 1970, and they're based totally on traditional imagery and on traditional beliefs about Aboriginal culture. I got obsessed with them, started to collect them myself, and started to think I've got to go out there and try and meet some of these artists. And then in about very early 1980, I was a little bit ill, sick sort of, in bed with a bit of a fever or something, and I had a dream where an Aboriginal man met me and took me over a bridge into what was at the time like another land, and it was like crossing over from a dark, sort of worn out world into a bright new incandescent kind of world. And so I thought that must be a sign, maybe they're sending me, giving me a dream. And so I bought a ticket and flew to Alice Springs a few days later, got off the bus from the airport and went to the Papunya Tula which is where they ran the Papunya Company. And that was the first Aboriginal cooperative, where they were trying to market Aboriginal art, and that was what I've been seeing. And there were a few old Aboriginal men sitting around outside, and they call me over, who are you, what do you want, what are you here for? It turned out they were some of the best of the artists. Yep. There was Tim Lura, Johnny Warrangula, Karpa, and they sent for a few more, and they had a little meeting, and then they decided that I was going to help them. And they told me to come back a bit later, and after a while I met Andrew Crocker, who was running the Papunya Company. He was an Englishman who'd been employed by the Australia Council to try and save the company that they'd set up to distribute canvases, collect them, and then market them. I just can't resist this. I want to tell you a tiny bit about Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew Crocker was the art advisor running the company, and he gave me a job a bit later running the company while he was overseas. And he was a funny guy. He was a little bit racist, which wouldn't be right for someone working with Aboriginal art. And he was very elusive, very hard to find sometimes. And he got blown up by terrorists in Namibia about a year later, just after he left the company. And so we all thought maybe Andrew was a spy. He was a spy. I found out later he was. Mrs. Carnegie, who was a big collector, said, no, he was a spy. And then about 2 years ago, about 4 years ago, someone was writing a book about Aboriginal art called Dollar Dreaming. And he interviewed me, and I told him this story, how we had this feeling Andrew Crocker might have been a spy. And he researched it for his book, and he contacted Andrew's brother, who was in the SAS, which is British intelligence, and he said that it was true, but don't tell anybody. We don't want people to know. It was quite a long, I'm telling you, it was quite a long time ago. It's just an interesting little sideline that this guy was working in the Aboriginal art industry, but he was probably doing work for the British government as well, and they thought it was to do with Pine Gap and monitoring Aboriginal activism in the area, something along those lines. So I've digressed enough now.
So both you and Vivian took over that role?
Yeah.
To look after Papunya Tula. And I suppose that's long after Jeffrey Barton is departed.
That was 10 years after Jeff Barton, or 8 years. But we had the knowledge to try and change it a little bit.
Yes.
Like, for example, to get women painting instead of just the men, because it was very male-based. Sort of, not really socially, like the women in Aboriginal culture are very strong, but the men wanted to keep charge of the painting movement that they created.
So I believe that you also got permission from them to paint using the dots and things like that, so that you can incorporate that into your painting as well.
Yeah, I did. That wasn't something that I tried to do, that I looked for. They suggested it.
Oh, right.
And it was originally just sitting down with them, helping them with their paintings, sometimes having the job of doing the dots, and sometimes having the job of painting the actual design, which is something you're not allowed to do. They're quite strict about it. They say you're not allowed to paint someone else's design, but if it's done with permission, at the request of the person who's the custodian, then it's actually rude not to take the offer. So they wanted me to know more about their culture. And it was a time when not many people had been there. And I think now it's much more closed and much more difficult to actually get insights. But they wanted me to go to ceremonies and even be initiated and so on. But it was like, to me, that was going too far. I just wanted to get to know them and see if there's anything I could do to help expose their paintings. Because the paintings they were doing, the dot technique, are there any in the show? This show?
This year?
No, this year.
No, they have been in the past.
But they have been in the
yes,
past.
in fact, one woman won it, Margaret Lloyd Buller.
Yes.
From Alice Springs. First
just say a tiny bit about Aboriginal art. It's a very powerful thing because it's like a religion. Aboriginal people believe that in the ancestors there is like spiritual or spirits, and their Dreamtime ancestors are the people who created the world, so it's like a creation mythology. And they do ceremonies for them when they sing to them, and they use designs that tell the stories associated with how these ancestral beings created the landscape. I think as a white person, it's a limit to how much I'm allowed to know.
Yes.
But within the culture, it's treated very seriously, and there are punishments like execution if you break the law. And so it's a very strict, ancient tradition with values and beliefs that have been there for 100, maybe 60,000 years, maybe longer. And so when they start to put these on paintings, they're very aware of what they were doing, that they had to act within their own law, so they had to filter out secret things and sometimes sacred things. But in a general sense, the whole image making was sacred, and it was something that was a part of a core belief about what had created the universe. I just want to say a bit about that so you get a feeling for the context for what they were doing and what I was exposed to out there. There was an idea that art can be very important to people that create it.
And then after that, you then get involved, like get into Asian culture and Buddhism, and and so on. Can you tell us how you sort of get inspired to do that?
Okay, I've always loved Buddhism since I was a teenager. Again, and it influenced like the Beat generation, the American writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, who I think influenced rock music and sort of helped put poetry into popular culture and social comment as well. And they were interested in Buddhism, but for me it was, apart from just being like a way of dealing with reality, there's some certain ideas in Buddhism like karma, that you pay for what you do, reincarnation, that we may actually have lived for a lot longer than we realise, ideas about matter, that you're not really just your body, that you're a spiritual being with potential. All of that's something that I was interested in. But I went to one ceremony at Papunya in Central Australia with a cousin of mine from France who was a journalist, and he had a photographer along with him, and I was their guide. And we went to a ceremony, and we were supposed to leave halfway through while they did the secret bit. Then we would come back and dance all night. Sounds good, but wait. And then I left, my cousin left, but the photographer didn't, and he stayed there, and then we heard a gunshot. And then some people came running out and said, someone's died, you better leave, because they think it's your fault. Because you're the white person here, you're the person who's not part of our culture. And it wasn't me, it was the photographer. But I was the one who brought them there. So they kind of put a wanted sign. Apparently they were after us with guns and stuff, and we had to actually leave and come back to Sydney, and almost straight away. And we were all haunted for about a year. Yeah, and they have this thing called the Gadaichi man, who's a ritual goalkeeper. Who's supposed to be able to fly through the air and find you wherever you are, and so we all lived in fear for a little while. And it made us a lot stronger. Nothing happened, everything worked out, and the Aboriginal artist said, we love you, we understand what you've done, we think you've done a lot to help us, but this is between us, between you and our ancestors, and we have to do what the ancestors say, and if we don't punish you, we will be punished. So it's like a little story that's got quite a lot more to it, but it's about the power of Aboriginal law, and it maybe has the ability to sort of reach beyond its own borders, and it really Tibet.
Right.
And I just got involved in it, and I found they just had so much knowledge and so much to teach, and I could address the problem that I was in by talking to these lamas, and they told me how to deal with it.
Okay. Right.
And so it became something that was like my salvation.
Yeah.
So I tried to practice it. I had various initiations, like Green Tara, Shenrei, the initiate. Anyone who follows Buddhism knows what the different deities stand for and how you ask for their help, basically, and how, for some miraculous reason, they actually seem to give you help.
Right.
So I felt protected after that.
Right. So that's when you started incorporating sort of that into your art as well, then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You also work with quite a few sort of like, or in collaboration with a lot of Asian artists. So, so is that intentional to do that?
It is, but not strictly, because I collaborate with a number of people besides Asian artists. What happened was I met Karma Funsok, who's a Tibetan artist living in Sydney, or in Australia, who's living in Sydney there, but he lives in Kyoto. And I just sort of, off the top of my head, said we'd like to do some paintings together.
Right.
And it started a collaboration where he would paint the Buddhas in the middle of the canvas, and then I would do the rest of it. And then he said that he was very happy because it worked for both of us, gave him exposure, and it sort of partly legitimized my own involvement with another culture. Because people were a bit purist in those days. They said you can't paint blocks because you're not Aboriginal, you can't paint Buddhas because you're not Asian.
Yes.
And they're all stereotypes that have now been broken down quite a lot. And it was ridiculous anyway, because there was a dot painting movement called pointillism, Surat, and something like Roy Lichtenstein and dots. There were a lot of artists that were painting from Bende dots, which are used in reproduction. So dots were already everywhere, but it's obviously an important issue. You do have to not take the culture from the indigenous people, but I certainly wasn't doing that.
Yes. I think that's what makes your work so interesting, because it's cross-cultural and you're transcending between culture from culture to culture. So maybe we might talk a little bit about this work that you won the Paddington Art Prize, Far Away. Can you just briefly explain why the particular title and your inspiration behind it?
Yes, I can. I didn't have a title for it, and I can tell you I hear voices, not like a schizophrenic person, but just like out of nowhere I hear a voice sometimes. For example, I was in the city once and I heard a voice say, "Turn around." I turned around and looked, and way off in the distance I saw my mum walking towards me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a different kind of voice. It's like a conscience, or it's like a religious voice telling me things that help. And the voice said, "Far Away Bay." That the voice said, just when I was kind of getting ready to send in it.
Oh, is that right?
The voice said it's called Far Away Bay. So I had to look up Far Away Bay to see if it existed or not. And there is a Far Away Bay up near Darwin.
Okay.
Right on the left of Darwin, and so I left the bay off because I wasn't sure if a bay was a landscape. But it might be a seascape. And there were pictures of Far Away Bay, and quite a few of them fitted in with imagery in the picture. So I thought, okay, maybe I have just sort of coincidentally done a painting of Far Away Bay, so I'll call it Far Away.
I noticed that you've gone a little bit looser with this current painting compared to your previous work. There's a bit of like abstract sort of, symbols on it. Is this sort of like a new sort of direction you're heading?
It's a new input into my work. It's obviously influenced by my kids' painting style.
Okay.
I don't know what that means to you, but kids can be quite helpful and quite inspiring and create within an uninhibited way. So when I was seeing them painting, I just sort of imitated what they were doing on the floor. Sort of very loose circles and lines and painting at the top of your head. In a general sense, it's got about 3 levels to it in terms of what makes up the painting. The first one was a gold background, paint the whole thing gold as a kind of medium to work on. The idea being that little bits of gold would come through and make the painting reflective. And then the abstract shapes went on to that. And then I kept it, I did that actually about a year before I did those. And then I kept it in the studio for a while and took a photo of it, put it on the computer, selected everything out so I could drop different things in behind the design. And so I dropped bits of other paintings, other imagery in to see how it looked. When I got something I was happy with, I took that image up to the studio and then recreated it. So in a sense, it's partly done on a computer.
Right.
But the recreation then becomes has its own life. And has its own things come together in their own way while you're doing that. And that second stage meant putting in the imagery, and because it was via a computer, there's a fragmentation, and the first layer is knocking out bits of the imagery that was put in on the computer. There's a couple of artists up there, Paddington, that's in there, Tim Laura and Daisy Lura, from a photograph of mine. I feel I can put people into a landscape because they're part of it. It's just the way the landscape's being used, especially if they're from a culture who believes that they actually return to the earth anyway, or who believe their spirit has come from the land. And they've got a little painting there, little bits of Aboriginal paintings, which again are all landscapes because they're all paintings of sites, dreaming sites where the ancestor is supposed to have created something. That's that part. And then there's some bits of Tibetan imagery in it, like offerings and clouds, which are more, they're in Tibetan imagery, but they're also from Chinese embroidery. It's just that my work has a lot of different influences, and so the embroidered clouds translated into painting, the bits of Tibetan imagery, bits of imagery of the Papuan landscape, and artists working on their landscapes, and up the top a kind of a sun. It's also again using bits of Tibetan painting with fire and what's called angry deities, protector deities. Then there are stamps, there are a few Buddhas, abstract shapes around the outside, little bits of colour just put in here and there, the clouds, the sun, part of the sun. And when I've got all that imagery in, I mask it with a thing called masking fluid. It's like kind of a latex medium that you paint over something and let it dry, and then you can paint over it, and then you clean it off. So I masked everything on it, and I put a background on it, clean the masking fluid off, and then I put the dots on. And the dots are like a visual thing, consciously referring to Aboriginal art.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I mean, artists do say that one of the hardest things to do is to paint like a child, so it's interesting that, you're heading in that direction. What's on the horizon at the moment? Do you have any particular projects that you're working on or planning to do?
I've got a few shows coming up. I've got one in England, that's a sort of survey show. And what I'm trying to do with my painting is to take a step back and look at Brett Whiteley's painting from the 60s and 70s, because he did things with landscape that I think no one's ever come near. And people like John Olson, Fred Williams, Arthur Boyd, they were all influenced by him, but they still couldn't do what he did. And so I'm trying to figure out what his secret was. What's your question? Do you have the answer? You know what I actually think, after studying it for quite a long time, and I knew him as well, commercial artist originally. He was a student in the school up in the mountains, and then his first job as a commercial artist, like same as Michael Johnson.
Yes.
I think that training where you have to create something that's pleasing for everybody else, like that is commercially successful. When you apply that to fine art, he's actually a bit of a winner. It's a bit of a successful combination, because most artists are kind of not interested in commercial art. Whereas Brett had the training and developed it into an exemplary drawing style that no one anywhere can match, as far as I can make out. But so I think I'm trying to, because of this landscape in my work, because I grew up with landscape painting, and because Brett Whiteley was such an amazing landscape painter, I feel I want to look at what he's done a bit more to find out how he managed to create such extraordinary paintings. It's obviously like a backward step for someone who's been a conceptual artist and a performance artist, and kind of basically been through the dematerialisation of the art object, and then the sort of rebuilding of art-making activity in a sort of more traditional way. Actually managed to ride all those waves, to then go back again and have another look at the beginning. It's exciting, actually.
Yes. Maybe at this point I will open up the floor to see if anyone has any questions to ask Tim. Yes, Mabel.
Brett Whiteley presumably painted while under drugs and enjoyed a sort of ecstatic state while he was creating his work. You did have drugs on stage when you were the hippie group, I suppose, but in your painting, do you get to this state of ecstasy with or without drugs?
Just a bit about Brett Whiteley first. I think when he started, he didn't have drugs. When he began, he didn't use drugs. Maybe a bit of alcohol.
Yeah.
When he was in England in the 60s, he was still an extraordinary painter. And I think, to my mind, it's more of a Buddhist thing where he maybe had more past lives and had developed the abilities already, which sounds a bit far out, but how do you explain it otherwise? How can someone be so good at something? And then when he used heroin and so on, I think that probably helped his art, and I've read that he was afraid that if he didn't take the drugs he would lose the inspiration. I think I'm not like that, because I'd never get enough time to do what I want to do. There are lots of things I want to do, and I don't need any drugs to inspire me. In fact, drugs can be a little bit dangerous, obvious drugs. But in the 60s, I did take LSD and smoke a bit of pot, and I did see things as being brighter and with more thusness, oneness. I could see all these religious ideas as being true, like that everything is part of something bigger, and that there are other forces, and that you yourself are a bit godlike if you can find it in yourself. But the process of painting is very time-consuming and laborious, and it's not often that you get these sudden insights or a sudden breakthrough into something where you might feel ecstasy. And a lot of hard work, I think, is a bit better than smoking dope or something like that for creating good art. So that's my answer, that I get inspiration when I'm working, but it's more of a fluid thing. It comes from lots of other interacting forces as well.
I was thinking less of the inspiration. I suppose the inspiration you would intellectually, aesthetically have thought about in your mind. And then when you came to doing it, I was thinking, while you were doing it, in the process of creating, do you feel a sort of...
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think that you've got somewhere that this is it. But it can be delusional. It can be delusion too. I think it is good to wait a little bit before you judge your work. The passing of time is a better judge than your own immediate excitement. There was one night when I stayed up all night doing painting, And at the end of the morning, I'd finished the painting, I started crying in front of it because I felt I've done it. You know, like I've proven to myself that I can do a painting. But it was as much the staying up all night and the hard work as the inspiration that came from. I know that song.
Yes.
Is it a Beatles song?
Eric Clapton.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, just a little bit about your process. You talked about first putting a sort of a glaze or wash of gold over the canvas, and to me the painting's very collage-like, you know, a lot of different effects that you're putting in there. I'm just interested to know a little bit more about when your dots are going in, and a little bit more about the process, because I think you said you put the gold first, that luminous quality, and then you added the larger, the main larger shapes, and yet the dots seem to be behind that, and yet the collage paper pieces seem to be behind those. So when I'm looking at the layers, it seems to me that the larger strokes are at the end.
Front on top.
It seems like. Yes.
It's a good question because you've actually picked me up on something. I didn't describe it exactly right. But the gold background is an acrylic gold, so it's not a wash, it's just a monochrome gold background. And what it means is if I leave bits, it doesn't matter because then there's this gold paint coming through and becomes part of the painting. So it can be quite rough with some of the process because of that. But what you're saying is clever because I had a problem with this because what I did, I masked all the shapes before I painted the rest of the imagery. Like there's the background gold and there's all those abstract shapes. Then I masked them just so that I didn't get any paint on them or anything. And then put all the imagery in, masked that, then put the background, then put the dots. And what I wanted to do was to keep the masking, so when I put the dots, they'd be cut off by the masking rather than surrounding the shapes.
So there was more of a continuum.
Yeah, and I found that was a little bit impractical, so I didn't do that because there's some reason I needed to see it all properly as I was putting it together, so I couldn't leave the masking fluid on it. But when it came to doing the dots, I did paint them as if they'd gone over the top of like as if the shapes were masked. It's getting a bit complicated, but I did actually consciously paint a bit of that effect in. Yeah, rather than using dots to outline the shapes, I tried to make it look like the shapes were sitting on top of the dots. Yeah.
Which it clearly does look like that.
Yeah, but it's an illusion, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So this, what I might term marriage between Asian and Aboriginal, is that a path you're going to continue pursuing, or?
I've already done it a bit, and there's an interview by Julie Ewington, who's a curator from the Queensland Art Gallery, where she said Tim Johnson believes that Australian art is part of Asian art. And I just got, no, that's wrong, that's not true. Because what would an Aboriginal artist think if you tell him his art is part of Asia, whereas he's older? But apparently I did say something like that. So I kind of had the idea that Australians could see themselves more as part of Asia than more as part of Asia than part of Europe or America. That we tended to be closer to a different culture from people in England and America who had their own sort of Western culture. So we could, to some extent, see ourselves as being Asian artists, even though we didn't really have Asian culture. But it came from Buddhism, that I had an interest in Buddhist painting, which is sort of Asian, but Buddhism is more international as well. It's meant to be for everybody. But looking at Buddhist art, I realised how powerful a lot of Asian art is. And I went back to some caves in China, at a place called Dunhuang, from the 12th century to the 16th century, and there are hundreds of them, and they're full of Buddhist temples carved into a hill cliffside, I was strongly influenced by that as well. So there was a Chinese Buddhist influence. And I also thought Aboriginal people probably came from Asia originally, which is probably true when the land masses were joined. They were supposed to have come through from Indonesia. And it was interesting to me that Buddhism had reached as far as Indonesia. Is that right? Yep. But it hadn't got to Australia. And then Australia had become a Western country, but it had the Aboriginal people who did have links to Asia, but had a very distinctive older culture of their own. So I thought I'll try and bring them together a bit. A bit of Aboriginal influence, a bit of Buddhist influence, a bit of Asian influence, and Western influence. And that was a pretty normal thing to do. It turns out lots of artists have seen it the same way. Not necessarily with the Aboriginal component, but definitely with Asian or African, or looking at some older culture for inspiration, like Picasso and Cubism and Braque and so on. And even Van Gogh used to paint Japanese woodblock prints. When I went to the Van Gogh Museum, there were some big paintings that were direct images of woodblock prints, and he had some in his own collection apparently. So
Monet as well.
Monet, yeah. So I felt, there's nothing to be criticised for. It's like you just sort of, this reality of living today that we're in the society is full of all sorts of different cultural systems. But I got criticised for the idea that I'd be diluting things or paraphrasing them. And I had a show in Canberra, the husband, the wife of the gallery owner, and me and him, and he said, "How do you like Tim's work?" And she said, "I think it's a pastiche." I said, "No, it's not me that does a pastiche, it's another artist." Or Lawrence Tillers. And then there's another argument about that. So, no, I like him. And he was a friend of mine anyway. He was appropriating everywhere in the 80s. And so I was seen as an appropriator. But for me it was a bit deeper than that. I identified with something and then tried to do it myself. I wasn't just lifting politically suitable imagery. I was actually genuinely interested and it came after trips to Asia. I went to India when I was a student, went to Thailand, went to China a bit later, studied it and realised that there were lessons there that Western artists could learn.
I was going to add, your art is obviously then manifesting as sort of a collaboration of your spiritual growth and the different experiences that you've had through that. Do you see another horizon? Do you see another place that you're going to go that's going to then come in and tie all that together?
The thing I got, well, first of all, it is personal in a sense, not personal like private, but I've always wanted to make my art about the things I was interested in and I believed in, rather than consciously thinking what's going to be important. I just painted and made art about what means something to me. That's why the trip to Papunya, to Central Australia, was just something I was doing, but it actually opened a doorway. And I was in there looking at art that was later on going to become international. So I do believe in that personal approach, that you've got to be able to know that what you're doing is your own art.
And your life journey, I'm thinking, as you're going through your life.
Yeah.
Something else you're looking at.
Yep. And some students ask me, they say, "What should I do? How should I paint this?" And I say, "Well, if you don't know, how can I tell you? Like, if I tell you what are you going to do next time?" I do anyway, but there's no point. It's like sometimes the opposite to what people tell you can be the right way. But in terms of my own interest, I got very interested in UFOs and conspiracies. Different people have different ideas about this, but I thought it would be a thing for the future. And it offers like a way of looking at, an off-world way of looking at life and looking at art. And it just became a very, very interesting thing to study. And I'm still interested in that, and I'm still not sure how to paint it. I put lots of UFOs in my paintings, And there are lots of people who know what they are and come up and say, you know what that is? Very dangerous. Very
Have you
dangerous.
seen one?
I've seen one or two there.
I've seen one.
Have you? There. Yeah. And I've got there are people who've seen them, they don't have any trouble believing that there's something there in the map. We don't know what it is, but people who haven't seen them tend to just be in denial because they don't want to admit that that's possible. It's a scary possibility.
We'll look forward to seeing those.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, I'd like to thank Tim on behalf of everyone for giving us such interesting insight into your artwork, and congratulations again on winning the Paddington Art Prize. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much for coming.
Yes,
So enjoy a few more drinks again. Thank you.